From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
The people who build cars don't sign them. They don't meet you at the dealership to take a bow or drop by your house to see how you like their work. But the quality of any car has a lot to do with the quality of the people who built it. So Toyota put their newest plant in Blue Springs, Mississippi. Mostly because the folks here are passionate about building better cars. Maybe they're just built that way.
How does an investment manager build portfolios to stand the test of time? At Franklin Templeton, 60 years of investing through every kind of market has taught us to manage risk as vigilantly as we seek reward. This solid approach has made us a leading equity fund manager. Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.
Ask your advisor for a full or summary prospectus with investment goals, risks, fees, expenses, and other information to read and consider carefully before investing.
Issue 1, the Big Mo.
There's so much frustration and people are hopping around. They're looking for somebody, and I think, quite frankly, that might be the reason we're going up in the polls.
Momentum. Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul has it. The Big Mo. The Libertarian candidate who is running on the Republican label. Dr. Paul is now positioned to win the Iowa caucuses because Iowa Republicans remain dissatisfied, many believe, with Republican contenders, notably Romney and Gingrich. Republican voters see Gingrich as zany and Romney as inconsistent. The Iowa caucuses, less than 3 weeks away, January 3, are closed caucuses, limited only to registered Republicans, i.e. GOP's true believers. That gives Dr. Paul the inside track. Also this, 1, ground support. Politicians in the state say that Paul has the best ground campaign. That means he will turn out his vote. Reminder phone calls, car pickups and returns, helping registration, etc. 2, money. Paul this year has raised $13 million. Only Mitt Romney with $15 million and Rick Perry with $17 million have raised more, marginally. 3, advertising. Tough, close to the bone claims. Here's his ad against Newt Gingrich, branding him with quote-unquote serial hypocrisy.
He's flipped and flopped based on who's paying him.
He's demonstrating himself to be the very essence of the Washington insiders.
It's about serial hypocrisy.
As for Governor Romney, here's the Paul take on him.
Mitt Romney, who is praised by Barack Obama for his Massachusetts health care program.
And here's the knock on Governor Perry from Ron Paul, M.D.
Rick Perry, who applauded Hillary's health care plan and forced young girls in Texas to be injected with an STD vaccine.
Question, does the first place showing in Iowa mean winning the nomination? Pat Buchanan.
For Ron Paul, no, it does not, John. But a first place showing in Iowa for Ron Paul, which is a real possibility, would blow Newt Gingrich's surge right out of the water. Gingrich would then get his first opportunity to win in South Carolina, and even if he won that, he might not get the nomination. This would be dynamite, John, because Ron Paul would get enormous national attention. He would rise in New Hampshire, not to the point where he could beat Romney, but he would wipe out Newt Gingrich there. I think the strategic asset of Mitt Romney right now is Ron Paul, and I'm sure a lot of Romneyites are go, Ron, go.
Eleanor.
Now, I don't think it's Ron Paul's intention, but he is serving the Republican establishment that really wants to slow or stop Newt Gingrich. If Ron Paul wins in Iowa, everybody will say, isn't that nice, but he's not going to be the nominee. There are 2 things you can say about Ron Paul, though. He's consistent and he's principled. And once you understand those principles, you understand how he can be for legalizing marijuana and for not doing everything possible to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He believes in virtually no government. He would dismantle the current government by 80%. He is a libertarian.
What about the conservative establishment? We've heard about the Republican establishment. You can speak to that. Look, as a matter of fact, you can reflect on the cover of your magazine, which I'm putting on the screen right now. That's a caricature of Newt Gingrich.
It is.
What are you saying about Newt Gingrich?
Marvin the Martian. We come out very strongly against Newt. We think he's just such a high-risk nominee for not enough reward if he actually would become president from a conservative perspective. Because if there is anyone in this field who might wake up as president and one day just decide he's going to cut some grand bargain with Nancy Pelosi, it is Newt Gingrich. He is just not reliable enough as a candidate or as a potential president.
Why is he so unreliable?
He's just erratic by nature, and he likes to say he's sort of aged out of all that. He's 68 years old, but just look at the last couple of years. He was against TARP, then he was for it. He was for the Libya no-fly zone, then he was against it. Paul Ryan's Medicare reform was radical social engineering, then it wasn't, and on and on. And just lately, John, he admitted that when he accused Mitt Romney of bankrupting companies in some shameful way, he admitted he shouldn't have said that, and that the Romney aides got inside his head and he reacted in the wrong way. You just cannot have a general election candidate in a high-intensity race against President Obama doing that kind of thing.
What?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. I think there is a growing sense as people begin to focus in on Newt that there's a kind of unreliability or a kind of erratic quality to
Zany?
Well, zany is a good word. Any name that begins with a Z can't be all bad as far as I'm concerned. But I really do think that, there was a moment there because Newt was very effective as a debater, and this whole process of selecting a candidate based on how they debate is kind of a bit weird in its first place. But I do think now that the real world is coming in on him, and Ron Paul's escalation in this thing, frankly, is a reflection of that. There is a movement away from Gingrich because they don't think he's quite that reliable, and the conservatives are moving over to Ron Paul.
Where did Paul place in the Iowa straw poll?
Second.
Number two.
Second.
Very
strong second.
very close,
right behind 150 votes behind Michelle Bachmann.
Michelle Bachmann placed number one.
Yeah, but it shows Ron Paul this time, John, has an outstanding organization, Energy, Fire, Youth, a lot of people coming in. 4,500 votes in an Iowa straw poll, John, is extraordinary.
Well, it's essentially...
Until 2008, who placed second in the straw poll?
And who placed second? Mitt Romney placed second in the straw poll. In
2008?
Yeah, because
I thought it was Huckabee.
Huckabee was number one.
Huckabee placed second in the Iowa straw poll.
He was number one.
He won the
2008.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's
in the straw poll.
Oh, in the straw poll.
Yeah.
Romney won the straw poll.
Romney won and Huckabee placed second.
Huckabee is a strong second.
And then Huckabee went on and he won what?
The caucuses.
He won the caucus in Iowa.
Caucuses,
it's essentially a three-way tie, but I wouldn't discount Michelle Bachmann. She had a very strong performance in the debate over the weekend, and she has an organization. She's on a bus tour visiting all 99 counties. She's another place you can go if you don't want Romney and you're wary of Newt Gingrich. There's a lot good to be said about Newt Gingrich, though. He delivered a really interesting campaign about a lot of ideas, like increasing the health budget so we can solve Alzheimer's, space colonies. Some things sound bizarre, but the guy really does think outside the box.
That's for sure.
Romney is a total automaton.
For Romney, the ideal result in Iowa obviously is winning it. But if he can't do that, anyone besides Gingrich winning Iowa is good for Mitt Romney, especially if it's Ron Paul.
Here's a little bit of history. George Bush beat Ronald Reagan in Iowa in 1980.
Right.
Right?
Right.
We saw what happened there.
Well, Reagan came back and beat him by 20 in New Hampshire.
So the win by George Bush in 1980 didn't do anything for him as far as the general election was concerned, as far as winning. Mike Huckabee beat John McCain in Iowa in 2008. Winning in Iowa gives a candidate momentum, a fundraising boost.
McCain didn't contest. He didn't really contest it.
He didn't play. What do you mean he didn't play?
He stayed out. He stayed in New Hampshire.
Huckabee beat Romney. And
Huckabee beat Romney in 2008.
Iowa's high risk and for potentially high reward for Romney. Because if he finishes first, the nomination could be over in a couple weeks. But if he finishes fourth or fifth, he's going to have a significant downdraft in New Hampshire just the way he did in 2008, and that's a doomsday scenario potentially for him.
What kind of a bellwether is Iowa? Is it reliable or unreliable as far as the nomination is concerned? The answer is it's deeply unreliable.
It's unreliable, that's correct. But there
so what are we getting so excited about?
I was going to ask you that very same question,
But it's enormously important, John.
Well, it's enormously important because here we...
Take Huckabee beating Romney there. Huckabee then goes on to win South Carolina. If Romney had won Iowa, I think Romney would have been the nominee in 2008, John. He just didn't beat him, and then he didn't win New Hampshire, and he didn't win South Carolina.
What do you make of Eleanor now boosting the importance of the gal who's in the race? What do you think of that? What do you think of that?
I think she's got a point. I mean,
you think
that
she got
gal
a point,
won the Iowa straw poll, but I think she's starting from too low a base now.
You don't think that's mischief on Eleanor's part, do you?
No, I would think. I would bet she gets between 12
Bachman?
and 15%.
You want Bachman to be the nominee?
No, but I think Bachman could, while the other guys are fighting among themselves, that she has a shot here. She's very well organized there, and she's another holding position.
And she's
if you don't like the others.
a hugely effective debater. She's become the prosecutor in chief in these debates. She's fiery and
about
fearless.
the last one. We've had what, 16 of these?
You saw her going right after Newt, and you saw Newt showing way too much irritation.
She cut Newt to ribbons in that debate out there in Sioux City. Cut him to ribbons.
You're talking about Saturday night?
Yeah.
I'm talking about Thursday night.
She burned him on the money from Freddie Mac, saying he was influencing the Republican establishment so they could keep up the scam in Washington, D.C. But her facts, she was correct on that, but she has a lot of facts that are wrong that she asserts are right. And so, she's not presidential material, but she can do the mischief you're accusing me of doing.
Let's talk about the polling in Iowa. The current polling in Iowa today. The most recent poll I've seen is by Rasmussen on December the 13th.
Right.
Okay? Of 750 likely voters, Romney leads by 3 points. Paul is in third place. What do you think of that?
If that happens, okay, that's going to be pretty much the end of the Republican nomination fight, because I think if Romney wins in Iowa, he's going to win in New Hampshire. He's going to have enough momentum to carry him through.
Is that the best diagnostic we have?
750 people.
John,
you can't
Romney
really
wins.
That's 3 weeks away.
Hey, John, if Ron Paul wins, Romney wins. If Romney wins, Romney wins. But if Newt wins, Romney's got problems.
And that Rasmussen poll is interesting, John, because he was the first pollster out in Iowa to pick up the Newt surge. He had Newt popping up to 32 way before anyone else. So maybe he is picking up the diminishment of Newt's momentum.
I'm going to put you in charge of watching the Rasmussen polls, okay? Issue 2, out of Iraq.
In the coming days, the last American soldiers will cross the border out of Iraq with honor and with their heads held high. After nearly 9 years, our war in Iraq ends this month.
Iraq had a political process established, a democratic process, and adoption of the principles of elections and the peaceful transfer of authority.
President Barack Obama this week hosted Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri Maliki. The meeting took place to mark the end of the war in Iraq. This was in Washington on Monday. Here is the president on Wednesday in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 50 miles south of Raleigh, by the way, welcoming U.S. military back from Iraq.
So as your commander-in-chief, and on behalf of a grateful nation, I'm proud to finally say these 2 words, and I know your families agree. Welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home.
Okay, in Baghdad this week, on site, U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta shut down the U.S. military campaign. Secretary Panetta saluted the American soldiers who were lost in Iraq.
Those lives have not been lost in vain. They gave birth to an independent, free, and sovereign Iraq.
Question: are we leaving Iraq voluntarily, or were we thrown out? Eleanor Clift.
A little bit of both. I think the Obama campaign has already done an ad saying promise kept. This president ran on getting us out of Iraq, and he's kept that promise. So yes, we got out because it was time and we wanted to, but we also wanted to leave a residual force behind, and we couldn't negotiate with the Iraqis that they would accept that. And Prime Minister Maliki's political problem, he could not accept that. After 9 years, there's a lot of anti-American sentiment. They are not grateful for us having liberated them by any means.
Isn't that something?
Isn't that
something?
Well, it's totally understandable, but they didn't want us there. And there's a great deal of concern that Maliki spent a lot of time in exile in Iran, that Iran and Iraq are going to become aligned, and that free, independent Iraq that President Bush envisioned and that this administration would like to see is not going to come into being.
What do you think, Pat? Now that we've taken care of Saddam Hussein, that's gone, and Iraq is sovereign.
I agree with Eleanor to a great degree. At first, I think it was just disgraceful that neither the president of Iraq nor the prime minister went out there to see the American troops off. But we are coming home because Barack Obama is fulfilling Bush's pledge. He didn't like the war. He's bringing us home, but there's a real danger, one, that the Kurds could break apart from Iraq. They're already seasoned Kirkuk. It could be a collapse of the government. There could be a renewal of sectarian war. We got no guarantee of anything in there. And in my judgment, I agree with the late General Bill Odom, who was head of NSA. This was the worst strategic mistake the United States ever made.
Let me pick that point up with this. Now the Washington political establishment, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCain, takes issue with the president's decision to bring all the troops home.
It is clear that this decision of a complete pullout of United States troops from Iraq was dictated by politics and not our national security interests. I believe that history will judge this president's leadership with the scorn and disdain that it deserves.
What do you think of those apples? I'll ask you, Rich.
Well, I think he's basically right. I think we wanted to get kicked out. There wasn't much of an effort by President Obama or Vice President Biden to make this thing work. Biden suggested in a news interview recently, actually, that if the Iraqis had asked us to keep 20,000 troops there, we wouldn't have stayed. And I think whatever you think of this war, a complete and utter withdrawal that risks washing away all of our gains is a historic mistake. Having a presence there, one, it reassured Maliki that he wasn't going to get assassinated, and it reassured the Sunnis that they weren't, again, going to be the victims of horrific sectarian bloodletting. Both of the assurances now are gone, and I fear what the consequences are going to be.
Let me ask more this. Is Iraq likely to turn out to be an instance of winning the war but losing the peace?
Well, there's a very serious chance of that because Maliki is a Shia and he is much closer to Iran, has spent much time in Iran, got a lot of financing from Iran, gets a lot of help subterraneously from Iran in terms of keeping his position in that country. And I think the real danger there is that if you could have a sectarian war between the Sunnis and the Shias, but even if you don't, I think there's going to be an alliance between Iraq and Iran that is going to be very much to the detriment of the national interests of the United States. And there's nothing much we can do about it.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think the war in Iraq was justified?
John?
I don't think the war in Iraq was justified, no. And this president has taken him 3 years to clean up the mess to the best of his ability. I just wish he'd been as successful with cleaning up the economy.
Not justified on moral grounds or not justified on strategic grounds? Just a moment.
On either way. You don't invade another country.
Well, you lose 4,500. You also take the lives of 4,500 soldiers and about 100,000 civilians.
Iraqis. Yeah, it's a moral blemish on this country, and it's also a strategic
you think the whole history of Iraq is saying, war, we've grown accustomed to your face. In other words, instead of war being treated as intrinsically evil and only necessary in instances of national security, it is not justified, no matter how exalted your motives are, like sovereignty for Iraq. It does not call for Americans to go in there and lose their lives. 4,500.
I think some wars are justified. World War II was justified,
I want to get him in.
Not this.
By what moral right did we attack this country which had not attacked us, did not threaten us, did not want war with us?
They had a terrible dictator, they believe.
Well, look, there's a terrible
dictator. Saddam Hussein?
There's one in Zimbabwe. We got a right to attack them.
Right.
We can go in there and
make the point. We cannot go around the world making war.
We had a history.
Because it weakens the concept of war, the reality of war, which is evil, and it's only made justifiable when there's a national security. Is there any national security involved in Iraq? Was there ever?
No. We had the guy in a box.
I think
we had the guy in a box who was hiding down in a sewer.
I think even people today, conservatives today, who think we should stay in Iraq, think we made a mistake going in, and we made a mistake in how we prosecuted that war.
Look, this was a vicious dictator. That wasn't just a random belief. That was a fact. The sanctions regime was
a vicious dictator. That's not a threat to our national security. There are a lot of vicious dictators around. That's Pat's point.
I know. Can I make a few other points?
Yes, please do.
The sanctions regime was fraying because Saddam was buying off all the people who were supposed to impose it on him. We thought he had a weapons program. There was a bipartisan consensus in this country in favor of the war, even Democrats voted for it. The big mistake was not a proper post-war strategy. It hadn't been thought through. If we had instituted a population control strategy from the beginning and hadn't disbanded the army, it might have looked a lot different.
Once you get inside the war game, you're playing that armchair general kind of routine.
Rich, what is the moral right of attacking and killing their soldiers?
Right. We were in a state of war with him that had never.
We were flying planes.
If he threatens us,
what's the dollar amount of the war?
The dollar amount of that war. $1 trillion and rising.
$1 trillion. And we are how many $1 trillion in debt?
We are 15 trillion and rising.
In debt. How much in debt are all of the members of the European Union?
16.
16.
Yeah, I think they're ahead of us.
About the same.
About the same.
Yeah.
27, and we still, I think, are ahead of them.
But Saddam Hussein was once an ally, I would remind you of that. And the real tragedy of this is the lives that have been so altered and damaged, and not to mention the medical care.
When did he stop being an ally? What happened that made him stop being an ally?
He invaded Kuwait.
Yeah, that was
took care of that.
Major intervening event. That was a major say he used to be an ally when he invaded one of his neighbors, engaged in a war against us.
Yes, and the first push stopped. He didn't go all the way to Baghdad.
Issue 3, EU plan vetoed.
Britain is out of it and will remain out of it. Other countries are in it and are having to make radical changes, including giving up sovereignty to try and make it work.
British Prime Minister David Cameron vetoed the European Union's plan to fix its fiscal mess, namely its debt, inflicted upon it by its 5 biggest debtors: Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain. The EU asked its members to pony up $268 billion in cash to offset those 5 countries' debt. Prime Minister David Cameron rejected the plan, in fact vetoed it, because the plan fails to protect adequately UK financial services that include, by the way, US financial institutions located in London.
I said before coming to Brussels that if I couldn't get adequate safeguards for Britain in a new European treaty, then I wouldn't agree to it. What is on offer isn't in Britain's interests, so I didn't agree to it.
What makes this plan so fatally flawed in his view?
Well, from his point of view, of course, the financial industry is a huge industry in England. London is the financial capital of Europe and one of the financial capitals of the world. It's a huge part of their sort of economy, and they didn't want to lose the protections that they felt they had. Also, I suspect they didn't want to get too closely tied to the mess that's going to take place in the Eurozone. I mean, that whole part of the world is facing a catastrophe. And the question is, if he's a part of this treaty, what is England going to be expected to do to pony up to help them out?
What do you think of the obligation of the healthy countries like Germany? And
you're missing the point here. One of the reasons that Cameron went out of this is the Germans were trying to drive their Eurozone into a fiscal union where every Eurozone country reports on its budget to Brussels. Brussels reviews the budget and then tells them you got to cut back or fines them or sanctions them. What he has done, Cameron, has ignited a firestorm, John, among the populist right in Britain that is now raging across Europe, and it's going to bring this treaty or this agreement, it's going to bring it down. And there you get to Mort's point. I think the only thing that can rescue the euro now is the European Central Bank's going to just have to flood the place with euros.
Let's get the arithmetic straight. There are 27 nations in the European Union. The Eurozone that Patrick is talking about, how many nations? 17. Now, what are the delinquent nations that have to be provided for? You've got Italy, you've got Greece, you've got Spain,
Portugal and
Ireland. Those
and
5
Cyprus.
are particularly delinquent.
And
it's their own fault to some extent. Is that correct?
Sure.
The way they've handled their economy. Why should the others have to pay for them?
Well,
in order to keep the union together.
The one country that is going to have to pay for them is Germany, and the German public will not accept that. They're not going to pay for a profligate group of countries and say, hey, you owe overspent, and now you want us to bail you out? The Germans are not going to do that.
The Germans have now a AAA rating from Standard & Poor's.
That's correct.
Why should she give that up? What obligation is she under? What is in the national interest of Germany?
Because the euro has made it possible for Germany to spread its exports all throughout Europe.
Yes,
you know,
don't cry too much for Angela Merkel. That's exactly right. Germany has benefited from an artificially low currency that has boosted its exports. So there is a benefit here to Germany that people shouldn't ignore.
Do you see any analog for the United States here? We have 50 states. We have a central Washington.
No. We always had much more of a single polity than Europe does. You can't have a democracy. You can't have a democracy without a single people, which they don't have in Europe.
False prediction. Who's going to win the Iowa caucus?
Newt loses.
Win.
That wasn't the question, Pat. Ron Paul.
I'm going to dodge like Pat. Newt loses.
Romney wins.
Romney wins. The McLaughlin Group extends deepest sympathy to the family and friends of Christopher Hitchens. The world has lost a gifted thinker, author, and iconoclast of both the political left and the political right. May he rest in peace.
If. For such a small word, it packs a wallop. If I live to 100, if Social Security isn't enough, if my heart gets broken, if she says yes. We believe IF should never hold you back. IF should be managed with a plan that builds on what you already have. Together, we can create a personal safety net, a launching pad for all those brilliant IFs in the middle of life. You can call on our expertise and get guarantees for the IF in life. After all, we're MetLife.
How you see investing depends on your perspective. While some focus on the short term, we see long-term rewards for those who stay invested. Having navigated up and down markets for over 60 years, we know how to spot smart investments, at home and abroad, in all market cycles. It's made us a global leader in investment management. Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.